What has unfolded at the BBC over the past week is not a mere technical error, nor an accidental miscue in the editing suite. It's something more troubling, the pattern of a broadcaster that cut the same Donald Trump speech not once but twice, years apart, in two separate flagship programs in a way that materially changed its meaning, ignored concerns when they were raised, and is now scrambling to contain the fallout by pointing the public towards Sir Robbie Gibb. Sir Robbie Gibb, as if he were alone the problem. It is a staggeringly maladroit attempt at reputational triage, and it convinces nobody, I'm afraid. The new revelation about Newsnight is especially corrosive. We know now that long before the Panorama scandal detonated, Newsnight also broadcast a spliced version of Trump's remarks from the 6th of January 2021, which conflated statements made almost an hour apart. That construction created the impression that he directly exhorted supporters to march with him and fight like hell in a single breath. The effect was identical to the Panorama edit that ultimately toppled Tim Davie and Deborah Turnus, though it wasn't exactly the same splicing. So it's two edits which are almost identical, but not quite. Worse still, this was not a hidden process. Mick Mulvaney, Trump's former editor-in-chief, called it out live on air. He explained calmly and factually that the line about cheering senators was from the early part of the speech, and the explosive line about fighting was from the latter part. Kirsty Wark brushed this point aside, and according to whistleblowers, the next day's editorial meeting raised the issue only for senior staff to dismiss it. This was not an error corrected in the cold light of day. It was an error defended, normalised, and filed away. This history renders the BBC's response to the Panorama debacle profoundly unconvincing. The corporation has tried to suggest a single lapse, an unfortunate oversight, a technical misjudgment, yet the Newsnight footage shows the identical situation and a very similar cut made in 2022, concerns noted and nothing done. That is not an aberration, that is an embedded editorial impulse. When you examine the BBC's handling of this storm, a second problem therefore emerges: the instinctive retreat to internal politics. Sir Robbie Gibb has become the lightning rod, the convenient villain in a saga that has very little to do with him. BBC insiders loyal to Turnus and Davie have pointed this as a right-wing coup, a hostile takeover by Gibb and his allies. That may be true. Liberal Democrat MPs have tabled motions against him. Ed Davey declared that Gibb had meddled and ought to go. Yet this is a distraction from the central point. The cuts in Panorama and Newsnight predate the present board, predate Gibb's recent interventions, and predate the Prescott report that triggered the crisis. Blaming Gibb is politically useful to some, but intellectually flimsy. The truth is simpler and far less flattering to the corporation. A cohort of senior editors had a settled view of Trump and his supporters, and that worldview shaped their editorial judgment. Once that worldview ossifies, the temptation to compress, to sharpen, to craft narrative through montage rather than fact becomes strong. And when concerns were raised by internal staff, those concerns were habitually smoothed over, not maliciously necessarily, but lazily, complacently, and with a sense of professional invulnerability that comes only from decades of unchallenged dominance. The present crisis at the BBC is therefore not one of ideology alone, nor of right versus left. It's a crisis of institutional habits. The Prescott memo, already damning, pointed to problems in coverage of Gaza, gender identity, and now two separate Trump edits. Taken together, they reveal a structure that has ceased to scrutinize itself with rigor and that views criticism as a threat rather than a corrective. The consequences are immense. Trump, never shy about litigation, is now threatening a $1 billion lawsuit. Panorama has been pulled entirely. Newsnight faces fresh scrutiny. Jonathan Munro, suddenly promoted after Turnus's exit, is fighting for his professional life, and the BBC's global credibility, already battered, has taken another blow. The corporation has apologised, but apologies without reform mean little. What remains striking is how little the BBC has managed to say about its own leadership culture. Davie and Turnus departed with solemn statements, but neither confronted the structural failure that permitted an edited speech to be broadcast twice unchecked. Instead, attention has drifted to Gibb, as though his Thatcherite sympathies are the true source of this saga. It's nonsense. It's also a classic manoeuvre of a bureaucracy under siege. Identify a lightning rod, shift the glare, hope the public will focus on personalities rather than practice. Meanwhile, the political class is circling. Reform UK has seized upon this as proof of long-standing bias. Nigel Huddleston and others on the opposition benches frame this as a cultural failing requiring wholesale overhaul. Dame Carolyn Dinenage has raised serious questions about the BBC's ability to meet its charter obligations, and frankly, after 2 doctored edits, the question does demand an answer. The irony is sharp. For all the senseless cuts made to those Trump speeches, the only cut that might now materialise is the cut to the corporation's authority. The scandal is not fatal, but it is serious, and unless the BBC confronts the deeper culture that allowed this behaviour to flourish, it will remain vulnerable to accusations from all sides. The crisis is not a coup, it's not a plot. It's a slow unravelling of an organisation that forgot that its editorial power is held in trust, not by right. If the BBC wants to emerge with any dignity, it must stop playing internal chess and start answering the basic question. Why did it take 2 years, 2 edits, 2 resignations and 2 whistleblowers before the truth was taken seriously? That is the real story, and it is far more unsettling than any fantasy about boardroom conspiracies.